Charley Ross, Germantown, and upscale neighborhood in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, was home to families living the American dream. Beautiful houses with lush and verdant front yards, many like the Ross family home, with high fences to keep its occupants safe from the streets. In this ritzy neighborhood, children played freely unattended within the boundaries of the neighboring mansions, seemingly safe. But that would all come crashing down on July 1st, 1874, when 4-year-old Charley Ross and his 5-year-old brother, Walter Lewis, were doing what children their ages were wont to do, playing in front of their house. A horse and buggy pulled up beside the boys and offered them candy. This had happened before, as they had told their sister's nanny, that men in a buggy gave them candy. Therefore, with some sources saying the men had been by the previous 5 days in a row, the boys felt no hesitation and again accepting the candy. But this time there was another offer, this one far more enticing and far more sinister. It was Independence Day weekend, and the children had been pestering their father to purchase them some fireworks, but to no avail. So, when the same men who had previously given the children candy once again pulled up to the walls of the family mansion, the children gratefully took the candy and asked if maybe they also had some fireworks, that they could have. The men pounced on that idea. The 2 men in the horse-drawn wagon offered the children the promise of buying fireworks from the store. The boys eagerly scrambled in, but once the horse-drawn carriage started moving, Charley began to cry out for his father. His innocent and naive 4-year-old mind desperately wanted the fireworks, but also knew something was very, very wrong. The men sent Walter into a Kensington store with 25 cents to buy fireworks, and when he was out of sight, they took off with just Charley. Walter came out confused and was found later by a stranger. Crying alone, he was safely returned to his father, but could only offer the aforementioned information. Charley's mother, who was away at the time, staying out of town, was not notified of the tragic activities happening. Back at home, it is unclear why her husband chose to keep such monumental news a secret, but he perhaps hoped he would find him before she had a chance to worry. She, though, had to find out the hard way when news of Charley's kidnapping hit the newsstands in the form of a $300 reward offered for information on Charley. On July 4th, 3 days after the kidnapping, a new clue arrived in the form of a ransom note, the first of 23 that they would receive. These ransom notes were received by Christian Ross, Charley's father. While the house they lived in looked opulent and therefore made them a target, the family had lost most of their money in the stock market crash of 1873 and couldn't afford the $20,000, which is the equivalent of more than $500,000. In today's money, Christian Ross placed a series of personal ads in the newspapers begging for his son back, but to no avail. Theories abounded, and Ross spent most of what was left of his fortune looking for his son. Then, after a period of inaction, the police arrested Chris Wooster, who would be found to have no relation to the crime. The police then turned their attention to 2 other men. William Mosier, a career criminal and an avid builder of boats, was the first suspect, and Joseph Douglas was the second, but both men evaded capture until more than 5 months after Charley had been taken. They were caught when they were shot in a botched robbery attempt, and while one died instantly, the other held on long enough to confess that they were the kidnappers, and that Mosier, the man who had just died, was the only person who knew where the boy was being kept. Douglas never said if Charley was alive or dead, or why exactly they took him. He then died without revealing any more on the case. Later, a 3rd man was arrested for being involved with the pair who had allegedly taken Charley. William Westervelt was the brother-in-law of one of the robbers and alleged kidnappers. He first insisted that he had no involvement, but later, while being held, he admitted that Mosier had been the only one with the knowledge of Charley's whereabouts, but that according to him, Charley was alive at the time of Mosier's death. They just didn't know where. A jury later convicted him of conspiracy, and he served 6 years in jail. With Mosher's death, the trail went cold, and Charley's father, out of money and desperate, penned a book called The Father Story of Charley Ross, the kidnapped child, and used the considerable profits, over $60,000, to look for a son. It was spent investigating the many fraudulent people who claimed to know something, as there were over 1,000 imposters looking for either reward money or fame. The last lead turned out to be a drawn-out hoax. Gustav Blair came forward claiming to be Charley. He said that he had been held in a cave as a child, and that his family had told him that he was a kidnapping victim. The family, exhausted by previous attempts to fool them, refused to engage with Blair. Blair, using only his testimony, successfully petitioned Arizona State Court to recognize him as Charley Ross, the kidnapped boy. And while the media hype was considerable, even after all these decades, the Ross family was suspicious and didn't believe him. Blair traveled to Pennsylvania to see the Ross family, but they wouldn't receive him. Walter, Charley's brother, said in response to questions of why he wouldn't acknowledge the now middle-aged man as his long-lost brother, he simply replied, "The whole thing is ridiculous." And later his instincts would be proven right, as descendants of Blair took a DNA test, and it uncovered that Blair was actually named Nelson Miller Christian Ross. The father, who never gave up hope, passed away with no new information. Charley was never found. Melvin Charles Horst, 4-year-old Melvin Charles Horst, lived near the intersection of Vine and Paradise Street in Oroville, Ohio, carrying a small red truck or red wagon that he received as a Christmas gift. He went to go play with his 4 friends from the neighborhood one late afternoon on December 27, 1928. The boys played in an empty lot by the railroad tracks near Chestnut Street sometime around 4:30 p.m. Melvin's mother, Zora, shouted for him to come inside for supper, but she received no reply. She sent her other son, who was older, to look for Melvin at the neighbors' homes, but to no avail at 6 p.m. that night. Melvin's father, Raymond, returned from work to find Zora. In a panic, both parents set off to look for Melvin. By that time, it was quite dark, as the sun had set at 5:06 p.m. that winter day. By 7 o'clock, the police were called, who quickly located and questioned Melvin's playmates from that day. His friends said that sometime in the early evening, Melvin told his friends that it was getting late and that he should start heading home. It was a mere 1-block walk from the empty lot to the Horst household, but Melvin was tragically never seen again. The only sign of his journey was the red toy truck or wagon that he had been playing with. It was found in the front yard of Melvin's home. By 8:30 that night, more than 4,500 residents of Oroville gathered to search for the 4-year-old boy, who by this time had been missing for approximately 4 hours. Raymond, Melvin's father, had a brother, Roy, who was the village marshal, and he spearheaded the extensive and exhaustive search, which lasted weeks and spanned over 100 square miles of land. Police searched door to door, but could find no evidence of Melvin's presence anywhere initially. Investigators wondered if Melvin, a Caucasian boy of stocky build with light brown hair and blue eyes, had been mistaken for a similar-looking neighbor boy who had a wealthy family. They thought that perhaps ransom demands would be made, targeting the neighbor family. But no ransom demands were ever made. Another theory surrounded the current political environment of 1928. Prohibition, the banning of alcohol sales and consumption, was in full force, and Roy was a strict and stringent enforcer of these liquor laws, which would have made him many enemies at the time. Rui had been living with Melvin and his family in the months leading up to the boy's disappearance, and was considerably close to his nephew Melvin. Authorities wondered if his disappearance was a kidnapping by bootleggers, manufacturers and distributors of alcohol, made out of revenge for Roy's part in enforcing the current, controversial laws of the time. The media covered the case and followed its progression, or lack thereof, closely. News of the boy's disappearance reached national headlines. Then on January 2, 1929, police arrested a well-known bootlegger, Elias Arnold, and his children, William Arnold, Arthur Arnold, and Dorothy McHenry, as well as his son-in-law, Dorothy's husband, Baskin McHenry, on charges of kidnapping. The arrest was made on the information of the 8-year-old nephew of Elias named Charles Jr. Hannah, who claimed he saw Melvin being lured from outside into the home of the Arnolds. A second boy, who was a 9-year-old neighbor of the Horse and the Arnolds, corroborated this story, and the arrests were made. Detectives theorized that because of the bootlegging connection and because the Arnolds lived so close to the Horse family that Melvin had been kidnapped. Out of revenge for the many arrests and multiple cases of imprisonment of Elias and his family members on alcohol-related charges, the Arnolds insisted they were innocent and provided alibis for the time that Melvin went missing. But the testimony of Junior and the other neighbor boy was enough to get Elias and one of his sons, Arthur, convicted of kidnapping. The two men spent 3 months in jail before new evidence proved that Junior, the boy who insisted he witnessed the abduction, could not have seen what he claimed to have seen that day due to his position relative to where he claims to have witnessed the luring of Melvin into the home. A second trial was convened, and the men were found not guilty and released. Junior then said that he had lied to cover up the actions of his own father, Charles Hannah, and another neighbor, Earl Canneld, and that they had killed the boy, and ordered him to tell the false story of the Arnold luring him to deter suspicion. When questioned under duress, both of the men falsely confessed to being part of the murder inside a garage that police accused them of drinking whiskey in. The police pressured them to falsely admit that they killed the boy after fearing he would rat them out for drinking. But this confession turned out to be false, and the true whereabouts of the boy remained a mystery. Investigators also pursued the theory that Melvin had been struck by a car and died as a result of his injuries, and that the driver hid the body to hide the crime. Theories abounded regarding kidnappings and murder, but nothing concrete ever surfaced. Detectives did pursue a theory that Melvin's disappearance had ties to organized crime, specifically to Anthony Tony Longley Fatch from the Akron, Ohio area. This stemmed from a woman who said that Melvin had been kidnapped as a ploy to enact revenge on Roy, and that she had been tasked with watching the boy for a few days in her apartment near Market Street in Akron. She said that LaFatch then moved the boy elsewhere. Authorities attempted to verify the account, but couldn't. LaFatch died in 1994 after Melvin's parents moved out of state to Florida. Authorities pursued the investigation, but it is a cold case. Melvin's one surviving sibling is his younger sister, and she longs for an answer in her lifetime.